At my husband's clinic launch gala, in front of 200 guests, he introduced his office manager as the woman who actually runs this place with me, and slid his hand to her waist while I stood holding our son's hand 3 feet away. I'm Maya Whitfield, a chiropractor, married to Derek for 12 years. He'd built a growing chain of physical therapy clinics across 3 counties. Whitfield Wellness, his father's name on the original building, Derek's ambition on everything after. That night, watching him laugh with Renata like I was a coworker he barely recognized, I finally understood what my son Theo, 7 years old, had been quietly noticing for months and never had the words for. I didn't make a scene. I found Theo's coat, told him we were leaving early, and drove home in silence while he asked why Daddy didn't say goodbye. I didn't have an answer that wouldn't hurt him. Derek came home near midnight, unbothered, like nothing unusual had happened. "You embarrassed me tonight," he said, before I could say a word. Leaving like that in front of investors. I asked how long it had been going on with Renata. He didn't deny it. He just said the marriage had run its course, and that he'd been meaning to talk to me for a while. Meaning to talk to me. As if I were a scheduling conflict. 3 days later, he told me it would be easier if Theo and I stayed at my sister's for a bit while he figured things out. Easier for him, he meant. I packed 2 suitcases and drove to my sister Priya's house across town, Theo asking the whole ride why we couldn't just stay and fix it. What Derek didn't know, what I barely remembered myself, was a name from my childhood. My Aunt Corinne, my father's older sister, who died 6 years earlier and left behind a modest estate I'd never paid much attention to, distracted at the time by a difficult pregnancy with Theo. Corinne had been a retired physical therapist herself, decades ago, and had quietly invested in small local practices throughout her life. One of them, 12 years back, had been a fledgling 2-room clinic that a young, ambitious Derek Whitfield had just opened. I didn't think about any of that the first week. I was too busy figuring out custody logistics and answering Theo's questions about why his room at Dad's house had different sheets now. It was my aunt's old attorney, a man named Walter Pruitt, who called me out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon. "Miss Whitfield, I've been trying to reach you about your aunt's estate for some time. There's a matter that requires your signature, an ownership interest that's been sitting dormant." I nearly hung up, assuming it was a scam. Then he said the name of the business, Whitfield Wellness. I drove to his office the next morning. Walter was in his 70s, meticulous, a little apologetic that the matter had taken this long to surface. Corinne's original investment paperwork had been filed under her maiden name, misplaced during a records digitization years ago, and only recently cross-referenced when the firm did an internal audit. 12 years ago, Corinne had put up the seed capital that let Derek open his very first location in exchange for a 25% silent ownership stake structured quietly so Derek's father, who disapproved of outside investors, would never know. When Corinne died, that stake passed to me, her only niece, buried in a trust nobody had ever activated because I'd never claimed it. 25% of a business now worth, by Walter's conservative estimate, well over $2 million. Did Derek know Corinne had passed this to me? I asked. Walter didn't think so. The original agreement predated our marriage, and Derek had likely assumed the silent partner was simply an aging retiree who'd eventually be bought out or fade from relevance. He clearly never expected that partner's stake to land, one day, in his own soon-to-be ex-wife's hands. I sat with that information for 2 weeks before doing anything. I needed to understand what it actually meant, and I needed a lawyer who understood both business law and divorce law. Walter recommended a colleague, Renee Ashford, sharp, unimpressed by titles, who reviewed everything and confirmed it was airtight. The original agreement, properly filed, properly witnessed, 25%, non-dilutable, without unanimous partner consent. I hadn't told anyone yet, not even Priya. I wanted to understand it fully before I said a word. In the meantime, Derek was moving fast on something else. expanding the clinic chain into a fourth county, courting a regional healthcare investment group called Meridian Partners for a significant capital injection. I only found out because Theo mentioned, offhand, that Daddy had been at a big meeting all weekend and Renata had come along. Renee explained what that meant for me. Any major capital raise or ownership restructuring required sign-off from partners holding a combined majority. Derek held 50%. His late father's remaining stake, 25%, had passed, upon his father's death 2 years earlier, to Derek's mother, Sylvia, a woman I'd always liked but hadn't spoken to much since the separation began. That left my 25% as the deciding stake in whether Meridian's investment could legally proceed. Derek needed one of two people to say yes, his own mother or the wife he'd just discarded. And he had no idea which one he actually had. I called Sylvia. We hadn't spoken candidly in years. Most of our conversations had orbited around holidays and Theo's school events. I told her everything. The gala, Renata, the sudden eviction from my own home, and then, carefully, what Walter had found. She was quiet for a long moment. "Corinne," she finally said. "I always wondered who that silent partner was. Frank never told me either. Then she told me something I hadn't expected. She'd been growing uneasy about Derek's business decisions for over a year, ever since he'd quietly moved company funds to cover a personal condo purchase he never disclosed to her, back when she still held nominal oversight as a partner. She hadn't said anything, hoping it would resolve itself. It hadn't. We agreed to say nothing to Derek yet. The Meridian pitch meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning at the downtown Marriott, a conference room booked for the full partnership group plus investors. Derek had told Sylvia it was a formality. He assumed her signature was a given, the way it always had been. He had no idea I would be walking in at all. I arrived with Renee 10 minutes before the meeting started. Derek was mid-sentence, gesturing at a slide about projected fourth quarter revenue when he saw me in the doorway. He stopped completely. "What is this?" I pulled out a chair. "I'm a partner. 25% since your father's silent investor passed her stake to me." The room went still. Renata, seated near the projector, looked between us, visibly confused. The Meridian representatives exchanged a glance. Derek recovered quickly, telling the room this was clearly a personal matter, unrelated to the business. Renee slid copies of the original 2013 investment agreement across the table. Corinne's signature, notarized, 25%, non-dilutable. Then the more recent documents, the trust transfer upon Corinne's death, properly filed, properly executed. The Meridian lead, a composed woman named Diane Okafor, studied the papers carefully. "Mr. Whitfield, does your operating agreement require unanimous majority holder approval for a capital transaction of this size?" Derek hesitated. "Historically, that's been a formality." "That wasn't the question." Sylvia spoke up then, calm, unhurried. "I'd like the record to show I have concerns about how company funds have been managed over the past 2 years. Derek's face changed color. "Mom, we talked about this." "We didn't talk about it, Derek. You told me, and I let it go. I'm not letting it go today." What came out over the next 20 minutes wasn't dramatic in the way people expect these things to be. No shouting, no accusations flying across the table. Just Diane Okafor, methodically, asking for documentation. The condo purchase routed through a business account, an unexplained 6-figure consulting payment to Renata's LLC that had never appeared on any prior financial disclosure Sylvia had reviewed, and expansion projections that assumed unanimous partner buy-in Derek had simply never actually had. It looked, in the plainest terms, like a man who'd stopped distinguishing between what the business owned and what he felt entitled to. Meridian's team asked for a recess. When they returned, Diane was direct. They were pausing the investment indefinitely, pending resolution of the ownership and governance issues on the table. No deal. Not that day. Possibly not at all. In the hallway afterward, Derek caught up to me by the elevators. "You did this on purpose. I found out I owned part of a business you never told me was struggling to hide things from your own family. I didn't do anything except show up." "What do you want, Maya?" A month earlier, I wouldn't have had an answer. Now I did. A fair custody arrangement for Theo. My ownership stake formally recognized and properly compensated going forward. And Renata's payments through this company fully disclosed and accounted for, whatever that turns out to mean. He didn't say anything. He just walked away toward the elevator, and I let him. The divorce took 9 months to finalize. Financial disclosures, a forensic accountant hired to untangle the clinic's books, mediation sessions that were sometimes calm and sometimes not. My 25% was formally recognized and structured into a gradual buyout that wouldn't cripple the business or the employees who'd built it alongside Derek. Custody of Theo settled into a steady, workable rhythm. I didn't want him growing up measuring which parent had won. Renata left within a few months of the Meridian meeting, once it became clear the undisclosed payments had put her name into documents she hadn't expected to be scrutinized so publicly. I never spoke to her again, and eventually, I stopped thinking about her at all. I used part of the eventual buyout to open my own small chiropractic practice, something entirely mine, with my name on the door instead of borrowed from anyone else's family legacy. Sylvia and I grew closer, oddly enough. She still calls most Sundays, still asks about Theo's soccer games, still occasionally reminds me, gently, that she'd wondered about that mysterious silent partner for over a decade. I still keep a framed photo of my Aunt Corrine on my office shelf. A woman I barely remembered clearly before all this, who'd quietly protected a stranger's future stability 12 years before either of us knew it would matter. That night at the gala, watching Derek's hand settle on someone else's waist, I thought I'd lost everything that made my life feel solid. I hadn't. I'd just been standing closer to my own foundation than I realized. I simply hadn't known it was there yet. If this story hit home, drop your city or state in the comments. I read every one,